and welcome to Protecht's IT Frameworks webinar, linked to our ISMS. Today, we aim to go through the new IT and cyber controls framework and the new modules there to help simplify how we effectively ensure we can comply to the cybersecurity frameworks of your choosing within the Protecht ERM cyber solution. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the cybersecurity lead for the global operation. I've previously come from a customer, and I've been in the organization for almost 2 years, coming up next year. I'm part of the sales team with some level of cyber responsibility for marketing and development, listening to you as a customer. Today, however, there's a bit of housekeeping, so I want to keep this meeting and this webinar to about 20 minutes. So we'll go through the presentation, of which we've got some slides to demonstrate some of the key components and some of the new module features, as well as the workflow that we'll work through within the demonstration. So that'll go for about 15 minutes. Also then we'll have questions that can be posted. So whilst the webinar is being conducted, there is an opportunity to be able to ask questions that I can reply to in the future, so after this particular webinar. And then we'd like you to answer a post-webinar questionnaire. We will have the slides and recordings available after this particular webinar. So some of the key features or key components for the new frameworks are very much in release 12, and this is the new central frameworks library. Now, this library allows you to define internal components of a particular framework. So it allows you to categorize or provide categories underneath the frameworks so that you can structure the framework as to your own choosing. We'll go through a couple of those frameworks today. Some of the frameworks we'll go through today will include mostly two of the cybersecurity frameworks that we utilize on a regular occurrence and have these packages available. Also, we have the Enhanced Controls Library. And so this Enhanced Controls Library allows you to capture additional information within the controls from a central library function. We can also contain, or we can capture, the likes of templating for controls testing, as well as details within the controls. So we can talk about the controls obligations, we can talk about additional information around testing procedures and items that we need to capture from an assurance perspective. Also integrated into that controls testing is the auto creation utilizing those templates. So once we've created a template for the controls testing, we can then schedule that every time we want to perform a new controls test, where we can then notify the owner of that controls testing at a regular occurrence based on the frequency. Now, some of the key components in the new central library are very much around the framework itself and creating a full hierarchical environment to capture those details. So we'll be able to show you underneath each of those details. And in this example, you will use the ISO 27001-2022 framework, and we'll show you each of the clauses and then also the appendix as well, which is going to be part of all of the controls. So that'll be part of the 27002 components for the detailed controls listing. We'll also show you the basic structure of the NIST CSF, and then we will look at how we can ensure we link those frameworks and those controls to other frameworks and other controls as well. So it provides you a very granular approach within the frameworks itself. So just quick workflow before we get into the demonstration. So we'll go into the frameworks to start off with and show you the details of how the frameworks are structured. Then we'll move into the Dynamics Controls Library. We'll then shift into our cyber, our ISMS component, and show you how the assets can be linked to those central libraries. We'll look at the controls testing capability within the controls. So how you create those templates, how you can then execute those tests, and then how we can report. And those reports can be on those controls, on those frameworks, and we'll show you some additional reports we've got up and coming as well. So let's get straight into the demo, and you'll notice straight away that we've got effectively release 12 in our demonstration today. So if we go straight into our central libraries, we're going to go into our frameworks, and we're going to show you quickly some of those frameworks and the details. So I have the ISO 27001-2022 framework here. And if I double click on that, you'll see that there is a structure behind this particular framework. Now, this is a structure that can be pre-configured, or it's a structure that you can create yourself. In this case, we've pre-configured this particular structure to show our clauses and our annex, so our appendix controls. And these are our annex controls, making up our 27002 controls library. So you'll see the clauses broken down through clauses 4 to 10, the context of the organization, and we have subclauses as well. Within the subclauses, you'll notice here on the right a number of controls that have been linked to each of those subclause parts of the framework. And you'll see overall we have 121 controls linked to the overarching framework itself. Now we'll get into the controls in a minute, but we're just going through the structure of the framework. If we move into the detail of this particular clause 4.1 under the framework, you notice some of the components that we need to capture. What we've also done is we've moved the statement of applicability that used to be within the ISMS component of Protecht into this central library now. So everything is retained within this central library and within the framework component. Now, under this framework component, you'll see that we have the control. We have a section and attributes around, is it applicable, what the control is, and we've got some pre-written help criteria. What is the purpose of the control? What is the control guidance? And then obviously some attributes. So we've got some attributes around the preventative detective, the CIA. We've got some cybersecurity NIST concepts that we can associate it with, security domains, and other operational capabilities that we can select from. We also can link this to other frameworks. And now we do have this linked to a NIST CSF framework, and we have it linked to a subcomponent of our NIST CSF framework. We can add a framework selection criteria. So we could select a particular framework. In this case, I've only got 2 other frameworks, one other cybersecurity framework, which is NIST CSF, and that NIST CSF actually goes into each of the subcomponents. So under governance, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And you can tell this is NIST version 2 with the govern, the new govern component. And we've then broken those down into subcomponents as well. So you can get to a very granular linkage per framework and per subcomponent of the framework. Also, you can link to controls as well. Now, this is linking dynamically to our new control library. And you'll notice that I've got a couple of controls here linked. So the main structure of this framework is to link framework components to other frameworks as well as to controls, so that we get that aggregate view of the framework and the drill down components of each of those framework subcomponents and categories. If I move up into the NIST CSF, you'll see the NIST CSF has been organized in a similar fashion to NIST CSF around the govern, identify, protect, detect, and we can drill down into each of those subcomponents as well. You'll notice that each of those subcomponents has controls linked to it. Okay, and these are controls within the library. And you'll notice potentially that each of these frameworks is set up slightly differently. We have the applicability in there. We do have then different descriptions and criteria associated to that particular framework that we can define. You'll see that we have our 27001 2022 framework subclauses linked, and we have specific controls linked, and these are just our ISO controls. So we have that many-to-many relationship between these two frameworks, and that really allows us that aggregate reporting of a framework to report over multiple frameworks based on an individual control being tested as well. Now, if we look at that dynamic control framework, you'll notice here I have 123 controls. All of these controls are purely ISO 2022 related controls within the framework. So if we go into the details of some of these controls, you'll notice that we capture some information around that. So we have the control, we have an owner, and we've defined if it's key or not. We always have a control description and an objective of the control. We also can add, and this is where we link the framework to the control, so we can have multiple frameworks linked to the control. And also we've got some tags here. So I've created a tag around ISO 27001. So if I had additional control frameworks in my controls library, my central controls library, then I could then report or filter based upon this within the actual control register or the control library. We have additional information around the control function, control performance, the frequency of the control, the overall control rating for design, operating, and overall effectiveness, with some rationale defined here as well. We've also got, as you can tell, specifically around the control details, the implementation status, and any remediation actions. So you'll see we also have some of the statement of applicability components that have been brought up into our new controls library as well. You'll also see some additional components here. Now, this is where we have the power of this new controls library, and this is where we can create templates. So for this particular control, and the control again is very much around security of network services, we can define a test objective, test instructions, test criteria, and then we can attach any of those documents where we may have some of those testing procedures. We can also assign an owner here, a reviewer, and then we can also specify a frequency. We can define the estimated duration of this particular template as well, or this particular test for this security related control. Similarly to the design effectiveness, we can create an operating effectiveness template as well, and we can fill it in as per our testing procedures for operating effectiveness to then allow us to create a number of controls tests. And these controls tests can be created. So we could create a new controls test, and you'll notice straight away, as soon as we do that, we can create our own testing procedures, or we can utilize the pre-filled template for our controls that have been predefined and enable the auto create. So based on the frequency that's been defined within the control and within the design effectiveness template or operating effectiveness template, in this case, the design, because we've selected the create new entry for design, it will auto create that particular test and assign that frequency that we had in there. And that frequency was every 2 years in this case. So if I hit the create, it will then predefine and pull in the control information, the objective, the test instructions from the template, and it will then bring in that 2-year test frequency, and we can save and close that and then start to populate the performance, the results, any remediation activities, and that will be then scheduled and notified through our workflow. That was a design. We can also do the same with our operating effectiveness, ultimately giving us that overall assessment of the control for our overall control effectiveness based on our assessment of those controls tests that have been performed. In addition, we have other linkages. So if we had linkages to, let's say, any of our ISMS components, we would see them come up here as well. I have a control. So this particular control again is A821 Security of Network Services. So if I went down into that particular area, so if I went into my ISMS and went into a asset and application and went into the asset and application, I could then link it to a particular control if need be. So I could create a control. In this case, I'm going to link it to a particular control. So I'm linking it to A8.21 Security of Network Services. And you'll see that this is now linked from an asset perspective. And if I save that within my asset, I'll have now two controls that have been linked to this particular asset. Now, this asset is very much around a firewall. So this is around security services. Going back to the links, you'll see that we have equipment, which is being protected, and then security of network services. So that's linked to our firewall. And if I went back to our controls, so security of network services, you will notice that under my links, I have now the ISMS assets and applications linked, and you can see that it has an asset around firewalls that have been linked to this particular register. Now, these are some of the examples of how we link and how we utilize the power of the new IT frameworks and controls, which then allow us to report on them as well. So if we report on these particular frameworks, we would typically report under a bunch of areas. And if I went into my analytics, under Analyze, we have most of our reports under the central libraries and typically risk management, as well as our ISMS. So if I had the ISMS, we'd be able to look at our asset profile report, and that particular asset profile report would pull out a bunch of results and show linked asset assessments and linked components. In addition, we have our controls assurance dashboard and our controls dashboard. And our controls dashboard will show additional information by framework. So overall, you'll see how many controls we have from our central control library. So we have 123 controls. How many are ineffective? How many have been effectively overdue from a review point of view, and how many overdue actions have been assigned. But more importantly, you'll see the frameworks broken out. So we have a number of controls of which we've had tested, and you'll see that we've had 11 tested. We've got some that are not effective from a control perspective, some partial, some effective that have been tested. And then we've got some link controls as well. We can start to then look at those and drill into those for more information. We have additional reports that are still being developed and created at the moment. And some of those reports include things like the testing schedule, of which we have a testing schedule for our overall controls testing environment. And this is for operating and design effectiveness. And then we also have some additional controls around frameworks, or different additional reports around frameworks. So we'll have the ISO framework report, and we'll have further reports as well that will pull out specific compliance requirements against that particular framework. So the advantage of having these specific reports is that we can utilize the frameworks, we can utilize the linkages and the controls linked, as well as ISMS components, so the likes of IT assets, the likes of any assessments that have been performed, so any threat and risk assessments, any asset risk assessments, any incidents that have been documented under the ISMS, and link them all up to our framework report to look at how many links we have, how many controls are effective, and overall health of the framework. And the framework can actually compare the target score versus your overall framework score based upon a number of the framework sections and criteria. Now, this is a little bit of insight into our new IT frameworks, our new controls library capability, and then how we link some of those components from our ISMS. I'd love for you to be able to visit our Knowledge Hub as well. So if you click on this particular link, or if you scan it within your phone, you'll go straight to our Knowledge Hub for further webinars and demonstrations and any further educational information. And please, if you don't mind filling out our post-webinar survey, this will help us develop these webinars a little bit more with your input as well. So thank you very much, and have a great day.